Hey guys, Luton here, back for another Below the Line, and this is the series where I look at your comments through the week and then respond to them. And this week I've got 3 comments for you. 2 are talking about Collapse and The Division, and we're talking about basically the end of the world. So eBunny is in first, and he's saying that this concept about, societal collapse, pandemic, is actually pretty interesting. A lot more than the rather popular zombie scenarios which people often seem to talk about, since the pandemic in The Division is something that is actually within the realm of possibility. This really makes you realise how fragile societies actually are, and how they're possibly always on the fringe of collapsing in some way. It's actually hard to imagine that things will keep going well for a very long time. In fact, you could probably say that many things will inevitably go wrong. I guess it's more of a question of when. He says, there have always been conflicts and things like that, but at least here in the West, things have been going relatively well for some time. Yes, this is true. Although we do have things like the refugee crisis going on, which has been interesting, and also we had that Ebola outbreak. Yeah, those are both kind of ongoing concerns. But, but there's a lot of things that have happened in the past which humanity has survived and society has not collapsed. There have been huge flu pandemics in the past. We've been through gigantic wars. We've had World War II. There's the fragmentation and scattering of people and the amount of people killed there, and society didn't collapse. So it takes more than that, and it really takes this kind of wide, unstoppable pandemic scale, I think, really, if we're going to see something like, an apocalypse, really. He then goes on to say, either way, when it comes to surviving when something like this happens, I haven't given it that much thought. Moving to a remote area and going back to the basics while trying to stay sane might be some of my priorities, at least theoretically. Then again, if something like this would actually happen, things could be very different, and I might not survive that long. It is a topic which has a lot of thought, and many people sort of muse about this, and there's whole television series like Preppers and stuff which have come out in the US about this kind of thing. There's a lot of people that prepare and like to be prepared for the unknown, but really it can only be viewed as a good thing. I think sometimes people can take a little far in terms of like digging out these things, but then again, it's like, it's up to you how you live your life and what you spend your money on, and ultimately how prepared can you be for something like this. I think regardless of how insane it may seem to some people, and I'm not somebody that does this. I don't collect food and water and have a real plan, a massive plan in place for it. I kind of have a vague idea about how I would survive, and I think I mentioned in the comments that I grew up in the country, and my family are very kind of outdoors and active, and so I have a good understanding about sort of how to kind of look after myself in that kind of respect. And I've been taught throughout my childhood about plants and animals and all these kind of things, so I kind of have like a vague understanding of these kind of things, enough that I would be able to maybe survive myself for a while. But as I say, as a society, a lot of that knowledge is just not there at all about how to look after yourself. As I say, I remember reading crazy things, and there was like an ice storm, I think it was either the US or Canada, and it was like people were lighting fires in their homes with no ventilation and then suffocating because there was no heating or anything like this. It's just this kind of insanity where you think, like, how can somebody not understand this? I think I remember reading at that time that somebody lit a tire inside their house or something, and you just think, what? Like, it's insane stories. You just think nobody would do that, but people do. But yeah, so there was a lot of comment about this topic, and it is really interesting. I think that as a game as well, it really deserves maybe more coverage and more sort of thought about these kind of pandemics and stuff. You really, really could do a lot more with it as a narrative. The Last of Us did a really excellent job, probably one of the best I've seen when it comes to that kind of pandemic situation. And The Last of Us, obviously it had a very kind of sci-fi-ish abstract nature with the disease that people were contracting, but the most interesting thing about Last of Us was that it was actually a real condition. For many people that maybe aren't aware, in The Last of Us, the fungus which infects people and then sprouts into this kind of horrific clickers and then turns them into things, in The Last of Us, it's actually a real fungus. That's what it happens to ants, and that's where they got the idea for that narrative in that game from. It's a fungus which infects ants, and it does exactly what it does in the game. It sort of infects them inside with the spores, and then it kind of erupts out of the ant, makes the ant go crazy, and eventually kills the ant, and the fungus then spreads spores to other ants and infects them. And that's where they got the idea from. They thought, like, hey, well, what if this kind of mutated and jumped to humans, and it did the same thing there? So it's kind of why, often with these kind of narratives, looking to real life and getting inspiration, because real life nature is usually horrifically brutal, and so getting the ideas from that and throwing it into a game is actually a really good thing. But yeah, it got loads of people talking, and Almost Bob back again with another amazing comment. He says, definitely an interesting situation. However, what I find more interesting is that usually people give you a weird look when you say that you're prepared for such an event to happen. No one is ever truly prepared, mentally at least, but a lot of people have an odd or rather unwarranted stigma towards those who do not try to be prepared and ready for societal collapse. And again, yeah, that's what I was saying a minute ago, is that people often kind of look at it as like an odd thing to do, but these have a plethora of ways they can be brought on, such as war, economic collapse, governmental breakdown, government overstepping their powers, and so on. I have to say, I think that's like a bit of a US fear. It doesn't really apply so much to the EU, but I know in the US people obviously always have that kind of government overstepping their mark fear, but it's not really something over here. Although I would say there's other areas of the world, look at like China, places like this, where the government are very often regularly overstepping the mark, and you wonder, like, sometimes you push things too far, society ends up pushing back. You get into that situation where a lot of the time, unless you've got a lot to lose, but when people have a lot to lose suddenly, it's like when people get to that situation where their back's against the wall. So I think I meant to say when you have nothing to lose, not when you've got a lot to lose. When people get into that sort of back against the wall situation, you'll suddenly find people, they will push back. But he says, I love DayZ because I think it made that sort of pandemic situation more tangible. To be honest, the zombies were never the issue. The players and supplies were the real core of the game. As much as people today like to think we are above our instincts and would never resort to violence, this is simply not true. We see it everywhere in the world where society collapses or even has a small stutter. It's definitely understated how easily that the world can be brought to its knees. And I think that's really, really true. I think a lot of the time people's kind of denial and fear about this is what really drives that, and also drives that negative emphasis on people that do like to sort of prepare and even think about it. If you try and throw it into a conversation with maybe people who aren't your close friends and who know you personally, you throw that into a conversation about the end of the world and sort of like, oh, what would you do? People can sometimes be like, yeah, whatever, that's stupid, don't be ridiculous. People don't like to think about it. They probably don't like to think about it because it's actually, I think most people understand that it's actually quite a fine line a lot of the time, and that it really probably doesn't take very much for it to happen. A lot of people, I think, that's scary, and so they don't like to think about it. Similarly, people who prepare and get ready and things, I would imagine, and I would speculate that people who don't prepare for these kind of things, I don't, but but then I don't have an issue with it. But some people who don't do that, I can imagine that there would be a kind of like a fear, maybe even a jealousy factor there, where they see someone who's like really prepared and they think, oh, actually, I am not prepared at all. And so that's where maybe that mockery comes from. It might even be a little bit subconscious, they maybe sort of feel like they're making a light of it, but then, sort of out of that moment later down the line in their head, maybe they're thinking, maybe I really should think about this and about that, A good example, and a very small example, okay, it takes so little for people to get very kind of frustrated with one another. The fuel strikes I used as an example that happened in the UK a while back, where there were fuel blockades, I remember it, and there were people, fighting at forecourts at fuel stations because they couldn't get fuel, and people were literally having fist fights over it. And this is something that happened in a couple of days. Experienced myself in London. We had a really, really bad period of weather a couple of years ago where it was very, very snowy. I know people always like, oh, it doesn't snow properly in the UK. We actually do have really full-on snow sometimes, but it usually lasts like a week at the most, right? But anyway, we had this very bad snow. It was very, very cold, and a lot of water pipes just froze. London has a very old infrastructure when it comes to water and some gas and things like this, and a lot of the water froze solid, and you just couldn't get water in your house, which meant that you couldn't have water on the taps, you couldn't use the toilets, the flush wouldn't work on your toilets and stuff, and a lot of people simply didn't know what to do. I myself wandered down the road and I bought about like 6 huge containers of water, and then I used that for my water, and ever after that I kept like several huge bottles of water, and even now I do. I actually, like I said, I don't prepare, but I always have maybe sort of 2, 3, 5 litre bottles of water. So it's not a lot, but basically if your water is off, you need to suddenly have water. And it's one of those things that people don't think about. If your water gets turned off and then you don't have water for like 24, 48 hours, it's actually really debilitating. It really affects you. You can't wash, you can't, you don't have anything to drink. And yes, of course, you could go out to the shops and buy stuff, but it depends. And what happened when everything froze in London was I went and got water, and then this was the funny thing, right? I couldn't obviously carry back all this water myself, right? Because it's just me. I couldn't carry all of these things back. So I bought them, and I said to the guy, okay, I'll leave these, I'll come back in a minute, because it was only like a short walk from my house. So I took the stuff back, and then I went back again to pick them up. And it was really amazing because obviously people who lived in my area also are having the same problem as me. And there was a few people who I'd noticed when I was coming back were like looking at me. And when I got back to the shop, they also had decided to buy water. And when I went back a third time to pick up the last bottles of water, there were a lot more people buying water. And suddenly it was like this cascade. And this is what happens, people suddenly realize, hold on, this is what I need to do. Suddenly, a lot of people panic, and then before you know it, the shelves are bare. I mean, it happens even like if, like Christmas time. In Christmas time, one day where the shops are going to be closed, and people strip the shelves. It's like, I always find it absolutely hilarious. Like, the shop is going to be, the supermarket's going to be closed for one day, right? And people go in and strip milk, bread, everything. The shelves are bare. And it's like, guys, the shop's closed for one day. Like, don't panic. But just think about that. That's one day. So imagine if all the shops in London or in any city, imagine all the shops are closed for a week. People are gonna, because a lot of people, some people go and buy a lot of food and they prep their food and they put it in the, the fridge or the freezer or whatever, and they do it for the week, or even 2 weeks. I actually only shop once. I only shop twice a month, unless I have to get bits and pieces, because most of the time I kind of prepare what I'm going to eat, and I don't need to eat loads and loads. I don't have huge meals, so I can survive like 2 weeks without really needing to go and buy food, right? But some people, they don't live like that. Some people live in a different way, and what people will do is they will literally buy as they eat. So they don't really keep food sort of around in the house. They don't freeze stuff or whatever. They'll literally, on every day, or they'll go out to eat and they'll buy. So they don't really have any kind of food supplies in that sense. I know that sounds crazy, because maybe I would imagine a lot of people don't do that, but I've met plenty of people who live like that and don't really sort of get their food in. But yeah, so the basic principle though is that things are very precarious, and it really wouldn't take very much for that to happen. But as I say, would humanity survive a massive pandemic? Probably, unless it was really, really, really incredibly contagious, very, very mutated a lot, very, very severe in terms of its death rate, etc., the mortality rate of that pandemic. I think that society would generally survive. As I say, you look at things like the Black Death, hundreds and years ago, and the flu pandemics that we had in the sort of 1800s, 1900s, and yeah, people survived. There was massive catastrophic death tolls, but people's cleanliness, people's hygiene, the way we live, etc., now would benefit with that. Science and its understanding of things and the way we can control things are better, but on the other hand, there are some downsides, and I think that the collapse small web browser game actually highlighted that. Things like flying, very, very dense populations, huge hospitals in cities where everyone goes to, and then you go to that hospital, you spread it. Those people come out of the hospital, they spread it. Before you know it, we live so condensed with such a high concentration of people that before you know it, it can spread everywhere, and that would be the real danger. Again, depending on what kind of infection you had, look at Ebola, things like this. Look at the incubation rate, so the incubation time even. So there's loads of factors, but it is an interesting idea. And actually, I say that television series Preppers was fascinating, because there was one guy, and I think he was like ex-Special Forces. I watched a few of those shows about the Preppers and stuff, and there was this guy who was like ex-Special Forces, and he had built like this. He had like a little ranch, and he had like these sort of there wasn't like foxholes. I can't remember what they're called actually off the top of my head, but it's like a little hole which is just big enough for him to slide his body in, and then he would pull like the little wooden sort of with grass on top thing over, and he could just hide in there. And he was, because he was sort of trained to do this, he could stay in there for like a day, a couple of days if necessary. So his plan was that if the end of the world happened, he would have his ranch there, and all around he had his food distributed and hidden in like bunkers. And the idea being that if somebody comes there, you would leave some supplies in the house, but most of your supplies would be out and about, so that if people came by, they would sort of see the supplies that were there, take those supplies and go away, but they would have only taken the kind of token amount, and you would be left with the rest of your supplies there. Also, because he was like in the military, trained as sniper and so on, so basically this guy, he's got like full ghillie suits. And as I say, he was sort of hiding himself away. So his plan, and this was something that you don't really think about very often when it comes to these kind of situations. You think, well, hey, somebody attacks you, you're going to defend it. He was like, no. He was like, don't do that. He was like, what you want to do is you want to hide yourself away. Don't confront them when they attack, sort of let them essentially take over, let them think that they're in control. And then he was like, what you want to do, come out at night vision scopes, take a couple of them out, then hide. He was like, instill fear into them. And then he was like, if you have the art of concealment, if you can hide yourself away, and you've got the weapons and so on to do it, that's what you do. Just take them out one by one, sort of over a period of nights until they freak out. And it's like, Jesus, man, it's so brutal and full on. But at the same time, amazing plan. And if you can find that episode, it's absolutely epic. Anyway, so the whole pandemic thing brought up a lot of topics and a lot of conversation in the chat, and it was a really good topic. So Division is out this week, and I'm really looking forward to it as well. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. Okay, now an ARMA comment for a change, which we don't have that often, but this was a really good one. So this was from Adam Rickman, and he says, "Hey Leighton, thought of a mission for you to run." Now I get a lot of these all the time, but this was really well explained and actually covered a lot of things that I want to be thinking about. So he says, maybe more of an addition to a main mission. So he says, you could have mortars in a highly populated town of civilians with a few guards. You wouldn't need to surrender any civilians, maybe just garrison them in buildings and let them run around like crazy when the shooting starts, because civilians do that in ARMA when shooting starts. They would need to check their fire before just shooting to win hearts and minds. That's good rationale. The mortars could be a thorn in the side throughout the main mission, so having a team destroy the mortars in the town could be fun to watch and help the main mission. Maybe take more than just a small team too, maybe try to hide them in between buildings and stuff to prevent UAV spotting or strikes. Maybe a civilian hostage or two at the mortars to prevent a bombing or tank driving up as well. Yeah, also really good ideas there. You could have FOs, which I think is forward observers, around the main objective at a really long distance with their stealth mode selected. It'd be difficult to spot them if they were a recon sentry, like snipers, ghillies, I think he's talking about there. Multiple two-man teams placed really far away. This would allow you to have line of sight and call it in. That is a good idea. I should start doing that, putting like spotter observers out and about so I can rationalise the artillery or mortar fire that I'm putting down. He says, to add even more realism, you could just throw one round in before you fire on non-pre-designated targets, allowing for the realism of an adjusting fire mission. You could even bracket them too, and if they don't move by that time, they should deserve to be hit with a 10-round FFE fire for effect from each gun right on their heads. It's actually more realistic to do so. Really good ideas there, and definitely things I want to start bringing into my missions, so that's really great. He says also an FPF, a final protective fire, preset beforehand. This real world thought process would be good for when they're getting close to the mortars. So when they're closing in, the mortars can still fire pretty close range with a really heavy barrage on where people may be approaching from. This would drop lots of rounds at these areas where you suspect they will come from. It's a realistic strategy that is used. Also, having pre-designated artillery locations at possible landings or locations like hills or buildings beforehand would be good for the realism. You've been saying these would have been pre-designated, so you might as well do it. I have actually started doing that on missions. I did it on one recently, so yeah, that's already going into place. Might make things a little harder for you, but I know you like to keep things as authentic as possible, or as authentic feeling as possible, and I think it could be a good addition to some of your videos. Sorry for the long book. He says, as an FDC, Chief for Battalion Mortars in the US, love seeing you utilise mortars. Not many people even in the real world utilise mortars enough or effectively. Keep up the good work. You're fun to watch. So yeah, really appreciate that comment. I've been trying to sort of figure out ways to use the artillery more, and I want to make a video soon as well, kind of talking about the way in which I rationalise decisions I make for Zeus, because it's funny, like when I stream or even on the YouTube videos, people are like, yeah, fuck them up, like throw more, put more AI, fire the artillery more. It's like, you've got to balance it. You can't just slaughter the human players all the time, because it's just not fun. It takes so long to get to the missions. You can't just kill everyone all the time. But I have started doing things like marking high points, marking positions that I think they will approach from, trying to cover myself, trying to use the artillery and just use the AI as well in a kind of more, I hate the word realistic, but yeah, authentic, in a more authentic way, so that we can try and get that kind of vibe going with the missions. And also, you know, as I say, sometimes you want to keep getting people off of those hills, because it doesn't make for interesting combat. It's not interesting to watch like 10 people sitting up on a hill LMGing the Christ out of everything that they can spot at that range. You know, you want to see people moving around, and the way in which I've started using artillery by focusing it on those hilltops has really benefited it. You know, that was the whole purpose of having artillery in the game for my Zeus missions in the first place, was to keep people off of those hilltops, try and make them move towards objectives, try and get more interesting gameplay, because the AI is still not like astonishing. You know, if you're on the ground and moving around, you can still take them out, but they will get you too. But it makes for more interesting firefights. So that's where I've really been pushing it towards. But some really great ideas from Adam there, and I'll be looking to implement those in. So guys, thanks for watching this week, and thanks for everybody who's been watching my videos and commenting this week. Loads more stuff coming up. It is obviously Division release week, so there's going to be a load of content about that. First thoughts, maybe mini reviews, some highlights, bits and pieces like that. So I'm looking forward to bringing that in, and there'll be some live streams going on as well. So thanks for watching guys, and as always, I'll see you next time. Thanks for supporting me, thanks for supporting the channel. See you next time for Below the Line.